Hey everyone, you're listening to Fantasy Uptick. I'm Jeremiah Blue, and today we're going to be talking about the 2020 Major League Baseball season, what the implications are from a fantasy perspective, and what you should be doing for your roster. We'll be talking about, obviously, the Miami Marlins. We're talking about injuries, players to drop, players to add, buy lows, and then just sneaky guys that maybe we should be keeping an eye on. With that, let's jump right in. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the Miami Marlins. Now, luckily, there's not a lot of good fantasy assets on the Marlins. Now, I know a lot of people were high on Villar. I wasn't a big Jonathan Villar fan just begin with. I don't have any shares of him in any league. So from that perspective, I would just say, unless it's Villar and you believe in him, and obviously stolen bases is a big thing this year, so it's going to be really hard to get those stolen bases. And I look in all my leagues, there's basically nobody that steals bases on the waiver wire. I do have a guy that I'm keeping an eye on that I'll talk about at the end of this show, but probably Villar is like the only person you should be keeping. I mean, and if there's other guys that are on your roster, you should have IL spots for this particular incident. Now, if you don't have IL spots, the season's so short, Villar is probably the only one that I would even consider holding with no IL spots. In other words, just burning a spot on your bench, because you're rotating players in every day and the season's so short that you can't really afford to have injured players on your bench every single week that you don't get that you don't maximize your roster in those roto leagues. Is just you're doing yourself a disadvantage. And there should be enough players out there, especially this early in the year, where guys like Ian Happ are unowned. Joey Votto was unowned in both my leagues. I'm not a big fan of Moran or Dansby Swanson, but you got those guys out there that could fill that role for you because they're hot right now, right? So rather than letting a player burn a hole in your bench, I would probably just drop him. And if it were me, I'd probably drop Villar too. I'm just not hanging on to injured players unless I can let them sit on an IL spot, which in all my leagues we have 5 IL spots, so I'm not going to be struggling with that. If one of the guys that I have got COVID, I'm just going to drop him into my IL spot, and I should be able to manage it pretty easily that way. Now, if your IL spot's full, or Miami decides to not play and they don't start putting people in the IL spot, again, I would just drop them. There is a scenario, I guess, that Miami's going to basically end the season, but I don't think that's going to happen. That's the whole reason they have that 30-player taxi squad, is essentially for this purpose. So in theory, they should just be able to get a bunch of guys we never heard of, because they're all prospects, to come in and fill all these rosters, right? So it's not the best case scenario, but baseball wants to continue the season. That's basically their best case scenario, is to bring these guys. I think that's what's going to happen. I haven't heard anything of what they're going to do with the Miami Marlins up at this point. I'm actually recording this on Tuesday prior to them playing the first game of the day. So again, none of that news has come out, but that's basically what I'm doing. I'm basically going to drop my Marlins if I can do that right now. Now, most of my leagues, all the transitions are towards at the end of the week, so I've already got any Marlins that I have are just on my roster until Monday. I should have more information by then. But if you're on one of those daily rosters, I'd just be dropping guys right now, picking up new guys, preparing that way, right? So there's not a lot to talk about as far as the Miami Marlins go. That's going to be more like real baseball stuff. This is a fantasy baseball show, so we're going to kind of move on past that, right? So people that have been injured already, it's been crazy. And again, this is why we kind of talked about how to set your league up in this scenario, that you're going to want a lot of IL spots. So Kershaw's already out, Verlander's already out. Those weren't even COVID related. Then you got Juan Soto that went out, Alvarez, who should be out for a while. That's not COVID related. You got Meadows, who's out, Moustakas, Giles, Kluber, Chapman, Gallegos. There's a lot of dudes that are currently injured that the draft came so close, we weren't actually prepared for that prior. These are things that happen post most people's drafts. So these guys are on rosters, right? I'm trading for guys with COVID. Now, if those people are trying to trade them, I'm not honestly trading anybody at this point, because nobody's really trying to trade. Baseball's only been going on for a couple of days. But guys like Gallegos, those are guys that I'm trying to buy low on. Guys like Chapman, Kluber, I'm not necessarily, because he's going to be out for a while, so I wouldn't be trying to buy Kluber. He's probably not even going to come back. He's a drop, unfortunately. And I'm a Rangers fan. I wanted Kluber to be great this year, but even when he comes back, who knows whether he's even going to be a starter or reliever towards the end of the year. Now I'm assuming they're going to get him back to starter roles if the Rangers make the playoffs, but that was a big loss to the Rangers. Again, dropping Kluber, unless I got that IL spot that's empty. There's no reason to not have that IL spot filled. Another thing that I did in one of my leagues, because I had 5 IL spots, is I went to the waiver wire, and it's like a daily waiver thing, so I can pick up players every single day. But once the roster starts, it's like the whole week. So it's not a streaming league, but at the same time, I can make waiver moves on a daily basis. I basically went out and got 5 guys who were hurt because there was nobody on my roster that was injured. So I just went to the waiver wire, started putting guys on my team. That way, at least now they're already on my roster, and I can rotate them in and out. Once they're healthy, then I can just put them in my roster if I want to, or I can drop them because I don't want to drop anybody from my roster. But there's no point in wasting those IL spots. So that's just something I did just today. So might be something you might want to look into doing on your own roster, because a lot of people will drop players that are injured, just assuming they're not going to come back. And guys like Quintana are probably going to come back at some point this year. So like, he was out there. That's one example. So again, moving on past that stuff. But those are the guys that we've lost this year. Players that I'm just straight up dropping are guys that are off to a slow start that might not have a lot of upside. So for example, one of the guys that I dropped is Brian Reynolds, and it's not that I don't like Brian Reynolds. It's just that there was guys out on the waiver wire that were off to hot starts, and I'm just not going to sit around and wait this year. Now, I'm not going and dropping a guy like Bryce Harper or somebody that could really blow up, like Rendon, who's on my roster, who's day-to-day is just killing me. But again, I'm not dropping those kind of guys. I'm just dropping those middle of the waiver wire kind of dudes like Brian Reynolds. And if he's off to a slow start, even though I don't think that he's going to be bad this year. I'm not going to wait for it to get going. I went out and got Dansby Swanson, Joey Votto, Ian Happ, guys that are already hot, and I dropped some of those dudes that were not so hot. A guy like Ian Kennedy, who I thought there was no chance he was going to lose the closer role. First game, he's definitely not the closer. At least he's not the pure starting closer. I actually think Greg Holland is going to be the closer. He's a guy that I have tried to get in the waiver wire. I haven't got him. I did get a lot of Anthony Bass, which again, I think until Giles comes back, I think Bass is going to be the closer for Toronto. I don't know how long Giles is going to be out. I don't think it's going to be as bad as some of the other guys like Verlander and Kluber or anything like that, but I am going to ride Bass out until Giles does come back. Now, if you get Bass and you can go out and trade him for a guy like Bradley or Jose Leclerc, one of those type of closers, because he is now, it looks like the official closer for Toronto until Giles gets back. Being that there's no information on Giles could be out a really long time. He could be out a really short time. If somebody would go ahead and buy in on Bass right now, this is the time to move him, because of the fact that, tomorrow Giles could say, hey, I'm coming back in 2 weeks. And now, Bass has already lost stock right there. So again, that's just one of the things. I am going to ride out Bass. I will offer out trades to see if I can get a more sure thing all year closer. But if I can't, then I can't. I'll ride out Bass as long as I can. And then I'll work the wire after that, right? Some other guys to talk about. We talked about the batters a little bit. Like I said, Moran, Swanson, those aren't guys that I necessarily believe in. But I don't mind picking them up right now to see what they got, but their track record isn't really that great. Swanson was a high draft pick, but that was mostly for defense, and he never really had a monster year in the minors. That being said, he is a high-profile player, got a good draft stock, so maybe he can turn it around. I actually buy in more to a guy like Joey Votto or a guy like Ian Happ, right? One thing to think about, and this is what I'm basically going to tell everybody, is prospects are going to be coming up pretty soon. Everybody that starts Friday or later essentially get that extra year of eligibility for the team. So guys like Mackenzie Gore, Spencer Howard, Dylan Carson, they're going to start getting called up, I would say, like first week of August. But obviously none of that news is out yet, so you're basically beating the waiver wire. If you can afford to sit a guy like Gore on your roster for a little bit, or a guy like Carlson, first baseman, on your roster for a little bit and wait for him to get called up, or at least see what happens if you're getting any news. Right now, there's no news out on Gore on when he's going to be called up. But Gore is a guy that I got in all my leagues, and I'm holding on to him because I think that somewhere around first week of August, he's going to end up getting called up, and then I already have him on my roster, similar to what happened this week with Nate Pearson. Nate Pearson should be owned in every single league, and he's not owned in very many. Spencer Howard's another guy that should be owned in every league. He's going to be starting for the Phillies, and it's going to be the same thing. Starting Friday, and the reason they held him out was strictly so that they can get that next year of eligibility, right? And then guys that I'm actually just monitoring at this time in like 2 catcher leagues for sure. Now, a single catcher league, I wouldn't mind having Isaiah Kinner, but in all my single catcher leagues, I actually have a decent catcher that I do like. But in 2 catcher leagues, I do have a little bit of Isaiah Kinner out there. So if you don't like your catcher, a guy that you should be monitoring is Isaiah Kinner. He's going to be playing third base this year for the Rangers, and he should be playing essentially like every day. So he's going to be playing more than most catchers. He could end up being an everyday at bat kind of player, right? So he could end up leading all the catchers in attempts just based on the fact that he's playing every day where a lot of catchers are sitting, right? So again, somebody to keep an eye on. And he had a great spring, and that's why he ended up winning the third base job. Again, he is a third baseman. He just has catcher eligibility in fantasy, right? He will not be playing catcher this year. Shed Long Jr. is a guy that no one's talking about. He's already got 2 steals on the year, and I think the reason nobody's talking about him is because he's not a guy that historically steals bases, but he can steal bases. If we go back to his minor leagues, 1 year he stored 19, and another year he stole 20. But other years, he's just inconsistent. But I think a lot of that has to do with the managers. Some managers like to run, some don't. He's batting first in the lineup, and he's playing for a team that last season ran, like, attempted stolen bases second most in all of MLB. So that's something to think about, right? Like, that's what I think is more important. Do the managers of those teams want to run, want their guys to be trying to steal bases? And in Seattle, they do. They allow their guys to steal bases. They had 162 attempts last year. That was good for second in the league. That's 60 more than 60% of the league. So again, that's a big difference compared to a lot of these other rosters that they just don't believe in trying to steal bases based on the fact that, sometimes you get out. Like you're not 100% on those things. They feel safer by just staying put and waiting for the guy to hit the ball. But again, some teams like to run more, some teams don't. Shed Long Jr. plays for a team that likes to run, and he does have years in the minors where he has shown that he can run. He's already got 2 stolen bases. A guy that I'm monitoring is playing second and outfield eligibility in Yahoo. So a guy that is also playing at some of the more weaker positions. Second base is not really that thick, so being able to start him at that spot and getting some stolen bases, because that's probably the hardest thing right now to get. So that's it for today's show. Let me know what you think about some of the guys I talked about. If you got any questions, post them in the comments. If you like the content that you hear, remember to like and subscribe. Until next time, see ya!